Good morning, everybody. I just want to take a few minutes. Well, nothing I do is ever just a few minutes, but I want to take some time to talk about this Kickstarter project going on, old school tactical board game, and why I decided to pledge to it. So I'm on the Kickstarter page where it's at. So as of February 27th, 16 days to go, it's been funded, and I just want to share why I thought this would be a great game to get behind. So first of all, it's called Old School Tactical, but as I read more and look at more, I guess it really depends on what your definition of old school is. Like when I think old school, I'm thinking like squad leader type of game, advanced squad leader. And when you get up close, you look at some of the counters, I can kind of see that a little bit. You just got your person there, you got your several combat values. Vehicles have a bunch of data on the counter itself, and I thought, oh, okay, well, maybe this is a re-envisioning of those systems, and decided I would dig in a little bit more. The reason why I'm checking it out is Itinerant Hobbyist had put on his blog, he had done some work sharing information out on some advanced squad leader scenarios he played, and then advanced Tobruk. And just to the untrained eye looking at it, the game systems look real similar to me, and so I know I can Google, and when you research, you can see that the systems are different, but without having actually read the rules, I don't know exactly how different they are. And so Itinerant just kind of summed up, like Advanced Squad Leader has very set phases where actions take place, and then Advanced Tobruk is a little more fluid in that it has like impulses. So similar looking, but they play different. So I was, oh, okay, that's interesting. And then he mentioned that there was this game on the Kickstarter, and so I thought I would check it out. And then so when I was thinking old school, I thought, well, this might be a good time to hop in on a game from the beginning where with the old school type of rules, I don't have to hop into something that has several expansions and modules and things like that. I can just start with the core concepts. And as I got to digging more and more, it doesn't feel very old school. It feels very kind of new school with an old school look, if that makes sense. So I thought I would share with you some of my thoughts on the mechanics as I see them, and maybe you can add to some of the discussion what you think, or if this is of any interest to you whatsoever. So what's going to come in the base game is a couple of maps. They're mounted maps, first of all, which I think is good. In my mind, when I think mounted, it's like the ones that come on cardboard, kind of like the old school games. I've gotten several GMT games, which are great, I love, but I have to mount the maps under like a plexiglass or something to help keep them flat. And then after you unfold and fold your maps a bunch of times, the creases start to kind of wear. So mounted, I used to have the old Avalon Hill MBT game that had mounted maps, and I always thought those are nice, fancy. So this would be good. You're going to have your weapons, units, men, some vehicle counters, luck cards, which we'll talk a little bit about. That's why I say it might be kind of an old school but new school rules, because the old school games really don't have cards like Advanced Squad Leader. I don't remember them having like cards that modify gameplay. Unit data cards we'll talk about, scenarios, 16-page color rule book, some dice in the box. Now on the Kickstarter page, they do have some sample artwork of the maps, which I think look great. There's also a video here that talks about how explains the basics of combat, which is phenomenal. I'll show you some information from there. And then the stretch goals. So it looks like they've made the Stalingrad stretch goal, which is what made me want to participate, because I was like, oh, well, I kind of have always been intrigued by the Battle of Stalingrad, but a lot of games, there's a lot of complexity for fighting that out. This looks like more concise, can play it. The rules won't hold you back so much. You can actually kind of play through the game. And then they have an expansion here, which it looks like, unless a bunch of people cancel out, they've made the second stretch goal, and then they haven't posted anything for the third or fourth stretch goal yet, because I guess they didn't think they would would come up on that. Um, so one reason I decided to back it also is because of this guy here, Mark H. Walker. So he's done a lot of games that I like. He's been through Lock and Load, so he's been there for like Nations at War, World at War series, his, just the Lock and Load stuff in general, Heroes of the Gap, those kinds of games. All very, very good games. And when he was owner of Lock and Load, that time frame, I mean, they just put out a lot of products. So he knows his stuff about games, wargaming in particular. So I know that this will be, put out in a relatively quick. It says when this is funded, we should see it in July. So, minus printer problems and shipping problems and stuff like that. Hopefully, be here in July. So let's look at some of the components. So here's your infantry counter. I'm not a huge fan of the infantry art. Art is a big thing that draws me to the game, on the counters and stuff. But it's better than the old school, just a black silhouette. You've got all your combat data, but you don't have all the data. So here's one thing that I like too, and I think they had an example of one. Oh, I thought they had a better example of one. Let me show you this real quick. Data cards. So all the units should have a data card. This is like a really small picture of it. But as you can see here, even the Pioneer squads, they have the information on the counter, but instead of having to reference the rule book and flip to all these different page items, they're going to have a data card. Now, the reason why I say this is kind of, I guess, kind of old school, new school, is Panzer 2nd Edition, which came from their first version. They had data cards too for everything, but their data cards have a lot more information. But I like that because it means you can keep your counter simple, and then instead of flipping through the book to find a specific subsection about their modifiers for close assault, it's on the data card. And then the same thing with the vehicles. Again, not as complicated as Panzer, but it's nice to have the gun ranges. This almost reminds me of like looking at the miniatures game Battle Group Kursk, where you have some of the basic information about the vehicle, and then there was a separate page with the gun. But on Board Game Geek, someone had taken the time to create data cards that put the combat data and the basic data on a combat card, so they kind of look like this. Everything you need to know about the vehicle is right there. So you have reminders on the vehicle counter, such as the HE firepower, the AP firepower, the range for HE fire, movement, that is a tracked vehicle. Here's the facing of the vehicle. The little black triangle tells you that's the firing arc, it's forward. This is the front defense, flank defense, so pretty well-rounded vehicle there. And then on the data card would be very specifics about combat, so like how AP fire is modified for range. So I like that a lot. So other things that I found interesting about the game. So if we come to the old school Board Game Geek entry here, what I like about it is got some sample pictures, but it's got, I wouldn't say these are final art, but just an example of the sheet here that comes with it. So you got your terrain charts. So this is very typical, movement costs. I guess that's old school. Here's a turn sequence, and we'll talk a little bit about turn sequence because it has kind of a new school feel, and I'll tell you why I think that, at least compared to the games I think of as old school, like Advanced Squad Leader. You're just going to have artillery strikes, air strikes, bog checks, rally checks, different modifiers for things in general. So that's on one side of the player aid, and then the other side with the combat. I like this very simplified combat charts. There's two. There's infantry combat and then vehicle combat, modifiers for the combat. And when you compare it to some games, it's nice to have just one chart and you get your results and then just a few modifiers. What I like about combat, it's very simple. It's basically comparing your firepower to the enemy's defense, and you take that difference and you roll, and then based on your roll will give you combat results. And this is why I like it and why I like this game in general. There's a lot of games that have these charts, combat result tables, and I think that's great. But I don't like that they play the odds based, where you take so and so's firepower compared to the defense, then you get a 2-1 ratio, 3-1 ratio, somewhere in there. And I just don't like that, because I don't like the math. And I've tried over the years. I found different calculators. I just put in the numbers and it tells me what it is. Most of the time, I know most attacks are going to be like 2-1, but I just don't like that. As a personal preference. That's not saying the game system is bad. It's just a personal preference that I'm not a fan of the odds kind of thing. And you know, I've read some folks, they say they get tired of that too, because as the gaming mechanics move on, it's how many units can I stack into one hex to boost up to 3-1. You know, it's like, oh, I'm at 29 points and this guy's got one. You know, I'm almost just 1 point shy of 3-1 odds. What else can I find to add into the attack? So then it's not so much trying to play like the tactics. You're now just trying to play the numbers. But with this firepower, yeah, sure, you're going to stack some units to a degree, and you're going to try and get more firepower. But they have a lot more limitations on how you get the firepower. So they have stacking rules, and we'll take a look at the rule book here in a second and kind of see how some of those mechanics play into this. But basically, when you look at the difference, you're either at +7 or greater, so you don't have to worry about, you know, well, gee, I'm going to make 2 fire groups that give me, you know, 300 attack power, and his defense is only 5. That's going to give me a huge odds. It kind of caps itself, so you don't have to worry about unrealistically putting a whole bunch of units in one spot to get that one attack, thus making them targets for something like an artillery. You can still try and keep your troops spread out, do a little bit of stacking, but it's going to look a little more realistic on the table. But that, again, like I said, it's kind of a personal preference. So this I kind of like. Once you roll, you know, you just compare it here with your chart, and then, you know, X is an elimination. CB, so you would have a casualty. You could just flip it over to the reduced side. B means you got to make a broken check. S is a shaken check. So it's very, very simple stuff. And if you fail a gut check, so what happens is your force has an overall kind of like a morale number. And so if it's like a 7 and you roll and you fail your gut check, which I forgot if you roll higher or lower than that. I'll know for sure when the rules are in full production and I read it. But basically, if you fail your gut check, then you either get the shaken counter or the broken counter, and then there's some rally rules and stuff like that to help get back from those states later on. So very simple. And then the vehicle combat is also very similar. You just compare the firepower of the attacking vehicle with the defensive value plus your modifiers, and then roll on the appropriate chart. And again, it uses the same system of firepower. It doesn't have to go to the odds. And I like that. I like it when a game uses similar mechanics for both infantry and for you know, vehicles. Because like Band of Brothers, like, I love their infantry rules, but I'm not a fan of the vehicle rules. Panzer, 2nd edition, I love the vehicle rules, but I'm not a fan of the infantry rules. Conflict of Heroes, that kind of brings in a similar system for both infantry and vehicles, so that's like a great game system. Love it, but it's this game here just adds a little bit more complexity to it, which you'll see when you check out the rules for yourself. So I keep mentioning the rules. So if you go to the Flying Pig website, okay, there's a copy of the living rules on the Flying Pig website when you look up their game. Old School Tactical here, and it's a living rule book. It's version 3, so they're making changes to it. So again, it's not a final product. Then you won't find this on the Kickstarter page, so you got to go to the Flying Pig website to look at the living rules. They might post them to the Kickstarter page, but currently it's not there. So when you go look at the rules, it's got a table of contents, and then you can come in and check it out. And here's where I was talking about kind of a new feel. You know, it might have kind of an old school look, but it has like a new school feel. Impulses. This is the first thing that said to me, oh, this is not like a lot of the traditional games I think of. What happens is every scenario is going to tell you how many dice a side gets, and the dice and the impulses represents the overall forces. Like here, it says a good thing. The impulses kind of reflect poor communication, ammo shortages, fear under fire, courage, like all these tangible things, intangible things even, that cannot be fully ruled out and explained in a game, but you can represent by saying, oh, okay, if the German player gets 3 dice and he rolls 3 dice 6 and he ends up with 10 impulses and he has 15 units on the map board, that means some of those units, for whatever reason, poor communication, ammo shortage, fear under fire, they're not going to get to act. But some of his other troops are going to get to act because they get to spend these impulses they've earned. And then if the Russian player rolled on his 2 dice 6 a 6, he's got 6 impulses, so he's going to get fewer options. And I like that. It's like the fog of war. It brings in a lot of stuff that you don't see in some of the older games. Because like in some older games, just in how I've seen them played or the after action, is they all get to do stuff, but in that very strict sequence of order. Whereas some of the newer games that try to throw in that little bit of chaos, command and control chaos, you know, not everybody gets to go. So that's where I kind of felt some of the new school, you know, so it's an old school game with a new school kind of look to it. But there's a lot of cool stuff in here as well. For instance, as you get into the rules a little bit more, your units can fire more than once at the cost of an impulse, so they might fire at this impulse and then move later as like a fire move or move fire, or just stay stationary, fire twice, kind of a thing. So even though you have 10 impulses and say 20 units, some of those units might take up all the impulses, leaving a lot of units unable to act. So you have to really think about what's best strategically for you and your troops. Here, as you go through the rules, lots of rules for the support weapons, tracked vehicles, transport. So again, it has a lot of the rules that you would find in a lot of these games, but they're very simple in here as you read through it. They don't need a lot of rules to replicate mounting troops, dismounting troops, armored vehicles, different obstacles that you can find. I don't think they're going to have data cards for mines and bunkers with all this data, so some things you still got to come back to the book for. One thing I like about the vehicles is one side of the counter has the vehicle, and then when the vehicle is actually destroyed, you flip it, it's a wreck. I've seen in some games when you flip the vehicle counter, it has these incredibly ridiculous, complicated charts that you know, replicate a lot of the combat information that you need, but it's on the back of the counter. That's why I like having that separate data card, because it puts all that relevant data in a separate space that reflects all the vehicles of that type, and then you don't have to keep flipping your counter to look at information. So when it's dead, it's dead. You just flip it. The luck cards, again, to me that kind of seems like a new school mechanic. I know, like, if you look at some older games like Ambush, that's entirely card driven. But as far as having like some cards that modify the play, so it's not a card driven game, but again, it's got some of those cards that can modify how something happens. You have your data cards. I know there are some older games that have the data cards, but I like these. They're concise, have all the relevant information right there, and I've always enjoyed that, because even if you didn't put any of the data on, like kind of like Panzer, if you didn't put any data on the counter, everything you need is still right here. So, and then of course you get into the gameplay rules, movement, transporting, group movement. And here's something, I think I passed it though, but talking about like group movement, I'm going to talk about stacking. And I think bogged down checks, unit morale. There's a lot of stuff you expect from your games. Combat, the groups, the vehicle combat. See, then there's even like crew survival, bailouts, carried infantry. They might take damage or get out safely. Assault moves, close combat. And just like most games, close combat has a lot more rules than the other forms of combat. You even have opportunity fire. So you have a unit that can shoot at somebody he sees moving, but it costs one of your impulses. So it's like, well, do I use my precious impulses to opportunity fire or save those for main action? So again, more choices with your limited resources. You have artillery strikes, air strikes. Again, simple to implement. So obstructions, structure collapses. This was something else that's nice that I've seen complicated rules in other games, but here it's pretty simple. Just a quick check if you hit on a building structure to see if it collapses, and the rules are right there. Of course, line of sight. So I flipped through, and I was hoping I could catch it on the quick flip through, but stacking. This is one thing that I really liked compared to some of the old school games I've seen where you have, you know, what people call kill stacks, where they just put a whole bunch of units in a stack and then they just kind of roll through an area because their combined firepower is greater than any of the defense they'll find on the defenders as they encounter them. Here, yeah, I'm sure if somebody was to go through, they're going to say, well, it's on this page. So if you know what page stacking is on, you can share that with the rest of us. I could look at the index. Let's see. But here's the thing with stacking and why I liked it versus the kill stacks. You're allowed 2 units, a leader, and a support weapon. So you can put a couple of things in a hex, but not a whole bunch. You cannot make like a huge kill stack to try and get your firepower way beyond the 7. And that's why I like that the firepower also caps at 7, because there's only so much shooting you can do into an area. So the other thing too I like is if you then decide to shoot into the hex where it has that stack of folks, you have to pick individual targets for the attack. So I might be attacking with X amount of firepower from 2 units, but you don't attack the entire hex like you see in a lot of games. You attack a specific target. So again, kind of some new concepts to this old school game that I think just made a lot of sense to me. I've got to find this now. Stacking. Oh, I just saw it too. Stacking limits. You know, how many times did I just scroll past stacking limits? There. Because it's right there. 2 units, a leader, support weapon. That's it. When firing in a stack, the target unit must be designated by the attacker, and units may not move through a hex, which would cause overstacking. So that's why I like the game. A lot of simplicity. It looks like it will make for games that play fairly quickly, but yet has enough flavor. There's some depth to the game. I'm trying to kind of, since I haven't had a chance to play it, but just scratching the surface, it feels like it'd be slightly more complex than Conflict of Heroes. And so I like the fact that it kind of uses similar mechanics for the tank combat, for infantry combat, without needing to play 2 different games. So if I want to play armor, I don't have to pull out, you know, Panzer all the time. If I want to play infantry, I don't have to pull out, say, you know, Band of Brothers. Like, Fighting Formations for me seemed like a really good game. I love it because the rules are similar, but it takes a really long time to play. But with the little bit more simplistic rules, you can play a game of this a lot quicker. So to me, I like that. It's kind of more bang for the buck. I can play in, you have that complexity, but it plays really quick. Looks like it will play quick. So those are some reasons why I like it. Now, going to the old school board here on the Board Game Geek, there's not too much activity in the forum yet, but there was a good question here. He said, like, some question, will there be a draft rule book? So there is. Just looked at it. His second question was, tell me about how opportunity fire works. I assume you spend initiative. Yes, that's from the rule book that wasn't, I guess, wasn't posted at the time that these were asked. But it does use one of your impulses. Third, I understand that side A might have 12 initiative and side B only have 7. How are they spent? So the way this works, and even this is great. So if one side has, like, say, the 12 initiative and one side has 4, whoever has the most, like if you have the fewest, you can actually kind of pass the initiative. So you can hold off on spending some of your points until your opponent has moved a whole bunch of his stuff. And so if you have your 4 initiative and your opponent has 12, Once he has spent 9 initiative and he's down to 9 left, then the player with 4, he would have to spend initiative because he now has more than the other player. So at some point, you're going to have to do something, even if it's just to pass and then waste your initiative. But as the person with fewer initiative, you can wait and see how your opponent spends his points and how his troops move before you commit. Or you could spend one of your precious 4 initiative for opportunity fire or something like that. The rules explain it a little bit better than me, but there is a well thought out system for how those initiative impulses are spent throughout the turn. Fourth question: how soon are we moving away from East Front in going to like the Mediterranean or Normandy? Can't answer that. We got, they have to get this. I say we. I'm not part of the we. They have to get the first game out. Stalingrad comes with it. This other campaign, to fall, comes with it. And then we'll have to see what other stretch goals they have, which may or may not include maps for anything else or special rules. Another thing, the 2 maps of the base game look amazing, which they do, and the Stalingrad map, which you can also find on the... If you go to the Kickstarter page, look at the updates. Here's a sample map. It's really small, but this is the Stalingrad map, and here it kind of compares the map with the red square. Amazing maps, and this one should be mounted as well. Great stuff. But his question was, in the base game, the first map represents spring, summer, fall. The third map is winter. From what I saw, there was no rules differences between a winter and summer, fall. There might be in the rule book. Maybe I just skimmed that part. But as I was thinking about it, I've seen games that do put penalties for, say, like winter or nighttime, and I got to thinking, well, then at some point all those penalties are applied equally among folks. So all that really does with the penalties is reset your baseline for difficulty, and then everybody's still kind of playing with the same penalties. So do you really need penalties? I mean, I can I can understand, you say, well, if I'm driving on roads and they're iced over, is there a penalty for driving if I go past a certain speed? All of those things make sense, which could be add-on rules for later. But in the grand scheme of playing a game, since everybody's going to face those same penalties, all those extra little fiddly bits do is drag out the play time. So if you're at night and everybody plays with a -2 night penalty, since that affects everybody, you might as well just leave the baseline combat as it is. Otherwise, that -2 is just going to make it take even longer to kill off the troops and finish your game. So you're going to take your 1 hour game, now apply all these special rules, and your 1 hour game now becomes a 3 hour game. I'm exaggerating, but I can see why initially I didn't see a whole lot of extra rules for stuff like that. It's just to kind of keep the flow of the game going. Is it realistic? Is it simulationist? No, but you can house rule stuff. I'm sure people will come up with some things to add, but that's my initial reason on why I think they didn't put a whole lot of rules to differentiate winter from fall and stuff like that. And then, let's see here. So those were some questions that came up, and I thought, oh, those are good questions. And then the rule book. Like, here's an example of a rule that probably you don't need. They mentioned here, like, if you take over a weapon position, if you capture a weapon, why are there no penalties to firing the weapon? And I'm trying to remember who put this here. Captured weapons. Yeah, it seems as though captured weapons can be fired with no loss of effectiveness. Seems like there should be some penalty for firing larger captured weapons at least. And Mark came up with a good response, which kind of made me think of the keep it simple. He said, captured weapons. Well, the trigger is pretty much in the same place. Yeah, I mean, that kind of summed up to me the keep it simple kind of idea of the rule set. I'm sure some games had that. If you captured an enemy machine gun position, now there's some kind of penalty because you're using captured equipment. But we have soldiers today. They train on multiple stuff, and then it can't be that hard to figure out how to point towards enemy and pull the trigger. So again, keep it simple. I like that philosophy. And then Mark said, well, of course, running out of ammo is an issue in firing at enemy's weapons. And this person said, wouldn't there be ammo sitting near the weapon? Depending on the weapon, depending on where the ammo is located, the thing is our supply train doesn't necessarily carry the caliber of the captured weapon we have. And the enemy is not going to bring their supply wagon up to supply the captured weapon. So, you know, I can see what he means by you might run out of ammo in that sense. So anyway, those are just some thoughts on the old school. I had pulled up Panzer 2nd edition because then we could go through, look at some pictures of like a data card. So for example, here's a data card of Panzer with all the combat data there versus a sample data card here. Conveys a lot of similar ideas, but the big difference here is, and even if you play Panzer and you play just the base game, there's a front and flank armor, which negates the entire armor chart when you want to talk about, you know, whole front, whole side, things like that. So Panzer, you could play just as simple as old school, but old school, they just run the game basically from the start. So that's why I say a little more complex than, say, Conflict of Heroes, but not as complex as some of the quote-unquote old school games. The draft rules are available on the website. Oh, here we go. And then here was a Conflict of Heroes I pulled up because, again, I think Conflict of Heroes is great because the mechanics are shared amongst infantry. You know, you look at the counters, the combat values are in the same places for the most part. They have the same meanings and color codes, and so one great set of rules covers both aspects together. So then you might say, well, why don't I go to Conflict of Heroes? You could, but again, I think the complexity is up just a little bit more because, you know, depending on how much you want to get into it, there's no real big differences on, say, the AP penetration values on distance versus, say, on the tactical card of old school. That's what this means. At certain ranges, your AP effectiveness drops. Like, for example, here at close range, your to hit number is pretty good, and then there's your penetration value if it hits, but at long range it's harder to hit, and then your penetration value drops because it loses some of that kinetic energy. That's not replicated in Conflict of Heroes, but it's right here in old school in just a simple data chart. So I think this is a game that I will play quite a bit because it has a little bit of that complexity chunk, but it's not overly complex. Has pretty good art style for the counters and amazing maps, and they'll be mounted. So if any of that interests you, you know, go to the Kickstarter. They have different levels that you can view. I'm not going to go over all that because I've taken way too long to explain why I like the game. And then here's some sample count. I can't blow that up, but you know, check it out for yourself. Watch the sample gameplay video. Look at the pictures of the different things that they've got here. I think this will be a great game that you can pull out, play in an evening, in an hour, maybe two, depending on the size and complexity of your game, but yet encompasses a lot of rules that you would expect. Off-board artillery, airstrikes, even the damage. When you hit a tank, see, I said I was done, but one last comparison, like Conflict of Heroes, I love it because when you like hit infantry or hit a vehicle, you pull a count, like a chit, and it tells you if it's shaken or pinned, and it tells you the combat modifications done to that particular unit. Old school has similar because of that combat chart here. You have the potential of being broken or shaken, and then with the tank, similar, you can damage the tank, and then there's a separate sub damage table. So either minor damage, meaning basically nothing happened, or the machine guns, the secondary weapons are damaged, or the main gun is damaged, or it's immobilized. On top of the damage, it could also possibly become broken or shaken depending on your combat chart results here. So lots of things covered in Conflict of Heroes are here, but with just a little bit more depth to it. So for me, this will look like a sweet spot of complexity and playability. So yeah, if you have any thoughts, sorry it took so long, but I was just pretty excited. So share your thoughts. Look at the Kickstarter. If the Kickstarter is over, you'll just have to wait till it becomes available whenever. But they do have, and I'll share here though real quick. This was one thing I was interested in, but I didn't do. They do have PDF copies that you can pledge for, so if you don't want to wait for the printed product, which will come much later, but if you're a print and play person, they're going to have the PDFs available shortly after the Kickstarter ends, where you can then print a game and play it yourself. So if you don't want to pay for the full game, and you want to see it sooner than everybody else, they do have PDF versions available. I was hoping, and I haven't seen it, and I've asked, I don't know if the folks who pledge at higher levels will get the PDF copies because the goal doesn't mention that. I'm hoping they add that. But if you don't want the full game, they do have a PDF version available. A couple different items there. So check it out. Thank you for watching, and we'll talk to you later. Bye.